You're the advisor.
All right, so we're waiting for the signage that tells us this is Checkpoint. You are indeed watching Checkpoint right here on KTN News. We're looking for your feedback, so please use the hashtag Checkpoint so we can track it. You can also send us a text message. The number is 22155. We're taking a look today at the crises that the country has had over the last few weeks or so. The teacher strike just ended. Teachers are returning to work tomorrow after being out of class for 5 weeks. We've also had the nurses' strike. We've had the issues of the wage bill that are being discussed. And so today we're taking a look at whether the opposition has given you some viable alternatives that make you think, wait a minute, these are the guys we should have put in 2013, or better yet, 2017 is coming. They are the government in waiting. Tonight on Checkpoint, my guest, Ngunjiri Wambugu, a political commentator. Thank you, who insists he was never in opposition. And Edwin Sifuna. Hi, Ngunjiri, Edwin Sifuna is an advocate. Thanks both for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start by talking about, the system that we have with us now. After the Constitution came into being in 2010, obviously, our system changed. We're now in a parliamentary system. So let me start with you, Ngunjiri. Do you think the opposition has adapted to the parliamentary system now? Obviously, a lot of changes. The party flag bearer, in essence, the loser of the election, does not go into parliament. He doesn't sit there. And there's a number of changes. Yeah. But do you think the opposition has adapted to this new system?
I think, first and foremost, it's important for us to understand that the way this system works, we don't officially have an opposition. Because the idea is that Parliament is supposed to do an oversight over executive. So we don't really have an official opposition.
So it's majority, minority.
Yes, it's majority and minority.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side of it is that you then get a structure where, because the whole idea of opposition is an ideology. It's what makes democracy work. It's giving alternatives. Opposition is about having an alternative to what government is giving nearly all the time. Now, has this particular, has a minority in this case adapted into opposition? I do not think so. I think they're still stuck on playing opposition as it was played before we got this constitution.
Edwin?
Well, to a certain extent, I agree with what my brother Ngunjiri says.
That's a good way to start.
That is a very good way to start.
It's true that because of the new system that we have in place, the institutions that were created by the new constitution were the ones that were supposed to, kind of perform the functions that traditionally the opposition used to perform. When we were growing up, in fact, the job of putting or keeping the government in check was done by quite a number of institutions. It wasn't just the opposition only. We had a very vibrant civil society during that period. We had a very vibrant church. And of course, in a democratic society, you also expect a free and independent media to be able to also, participate in keeping the government in check. Where I tend to part ways with my friend is that if you look at the performance that has been put on by the current opposition, I would say that in the circumstances in which they have found themselves, it is quite commendable that they have actually been able to, achieve what it is that has been achieved. From where I sit, in actual truth, the Kenyan opposition is the only reason, that is the only thing that stands between this country and outright, dictatorial state, because we have seen on various instances when there has been an attempt by the government, by the executive to usurp powers that they do not have. It has only been the opposition that has stood up against such advances and put them in their place.
Okay, Edwin, perhaps we can talk about some of those measurables for a moment.
Yes.
Let's speak to some of those examples that you can clearly cite that say the opposition or the minority, if you like, has done its work in keeping the government in check.
Well, for instance, we know that the opposition stands for a free and democratic society that is governed by the rule of law. Now, the most recent and readily available example is, for instance, when there was a push by the executive to introduce certain security laws in the guise of fighting terrorism that were a clear affront on several, freedoms and fundamental freedoms and rights that are enshrined under the Bill of Rights. So you would see in those proposals, for instance, attempts to cripple the media, attempts to take away very fundamental rights of the public, for instance, to assemble peacefully, even the right to a fair trial. And you saw the opposition code take up those matters and articulate them in court, and the court actually agreed with the opposition on such instances.
So one success for the security. Ngunjiri, you don't agree?
You see that I find that particular narrative by the opposition very, very mischievous. The security laws were 108 clauses. 190 something of them passed. The court stopped 8 of them. And they have been, and Senate wants to take them back. So I find it very, very mischievous to every time opposition suggests that they actually stopped the security laws from being implemented, because they actually got implemented. They stopped a certain, 10% of them from being passed,
that is
and majority of them.
That is what is supposed to happen. That's what we are saying. You are not just supposed to dispute everything.
But you see, they are not contentious clauses.
We are saying there were certain things that people agreed with.
Okay.
For instance, there was a proposal there to introduce a punishment for people who insult the dignity of women. When we saw those instances of stripping of women, there was a time when there was a rise in such instances. We are not going to oppose that just because you are the opposition. The opposition was very, very clear that there were certain things in the provisions on the security laws amendments that were good, but that there are things that were an affront to certain fundamental freedoms and rights which they could not countenance. And that is why they went to court, and the court did not strike out the entire act or the entire amendments, but they struck out those amendments that the opposition pointed out that were a threat to those fundamental freedoms.
All right.
The point I was trying to make is the opposition went with a whole list of amendments that they actually wanted to strike out. 8 of them are what the judge struck out. But then it also explains a fundamental takeaway from this in terms of how the opposition relates or criticizes or challenges government. Because one of the things you'd have actually expected is to see an alternative. There's a certain thing that we were all at a situation where we were trying to manage our security system. One of the roles of the opposition is to actually provide alternatives. So one of the things that would have been really nice was to see how would the opposition have achieved the same objective.
Right.
And they were.
Yes.
To be fair, Ngunjiri, even if they didn't provide the alternatives, but they were quick to point out that clauses 1, 2, 3, 4 were an affront on some of the basic human rights, and in that regard, they would count that as a success. Not so?
They would. It would be interesting to see what happens when this Senate goes back to court with them again.
Let me just say this. It is not also true that during the height of the terrorism problem that the opposition did not provide any solutions. You will remember there was a proposal that emanated from the opposition when Westgate happened, to actually the president to follow through on his promise to put together a commission of inquiry to find out the flaws in our security apparatus and systems and workings that would have allowed those terrorists to conduct themselves in the manner in which they did over that period of time. There was also the proposal that came from the opposition for us to relook at our engagement in Somalia, where they proposed a phased withdrawal similar to what we saw the United States undertaking in Iraq. So it is not true that even during that particular debate there were no alternatives. The problem that we have in this country is that unfortunately where an idea originates is as important as the idea itself in terms of whether it is going to be implemented or not. For instance, just a few months ago we were talking about the sugar crisis, and we pointed out that we should not just sit back and say, okay, we have an inefficient sugar industry that produces expensive sugar, or that we have a deficit in our production and therefore what we should do is import sugar.
Right.
You saw the opposition actually telling the president to look at the reasons why our mills are inefficient and propose certain solutions, including an upgrade of those industries. And you saw recently the president announced a 50 billion bailout for the sugar industry. So that it is not true that the opposition has never provided any solutions. And unfortunately, when those solutions are picked up and actually implemented, nobody says, oh, thank you for providing those solutions.
Talking about solutions and providing some of those, Ngunjiri, it's been said that anytime anybody provides critique for the executive and the government, then the narrative that kicks in is that you're not patriotic enough, and that you need to stand with the country, and that we need to stop painting the country in a bad light, and that these are some of the issues that just, muddy the waters when it comes to providing alternatives. What do you have to say about that?
That's true. One of the challenges of criticizing government, from wherever you stand, is that you're going to be assumed. Kenyans mistake criticism and patriotism. Patriotism is actually defined as standing with your country and with your government, when it's right. I think what has been a major challenge, especially for the opposition, is that the criticism of government is a political strategy. It is not based on the fact that they're criticizing government for the sake of actually providing, because they're not doing it constructively.
Well, how would you explain that? Yeah.
I'm trying to look. For example, we've had several situations. We had the rally that they had. Was it last week or last week? But
yeah.
The rally where they unveiled an M-Pesa number. And when you listened to that particular to the conversations that were going on in that rally, I did not hear a single constructive solution, a single constructive criticism to what was happening with the teachers' strike. What I had were insults. I had a lot of brinkmanship. And the problem, and I guess we should not be too hard on ourselves, because we are maturing, we're just learning how to be a democracy. One of the tenets of democracy is that your opposition at every time needs to develop an alternative that works. And by the way, it's important for us to note that Kenya has had oppositions that worked. Starting with the one from Jaramogi 1992. It worked, including the one by Uhuru in 2002. The one by Uhuru even had a shadow cabinet, and every time the government
but a shadow
generated
cabinet under this system.
But you see, this is what we are talking about. When you're talking about an opposition, for example, when the government generates a budget, this is money that everybody knows that government has. We have a certain amount of money. I would expect the opposition to actually generate a budget of what they would do were they in power. So that when we are challenging the government and saying this is not the best way to spend this money, we are challenging them with an option. Where the opposition is saying, were we the ones in government and we collected 1.1 trillion shillings, this is where we would place our emphasis. This is what we would do with this amount of money. It's what we do. Now, it then allows the rest of us public to actually have a conversation with options. Now, what these guys do is point out and say, that is not working. And then they're just like us. They're just like the public. We are all complaining.
It is also not true. Unfortunately, the example that he cited of the Uhuru Park rally, yes, it is true that there was some unsavory language that was used at that particular rally. But he cannot just lie to the country that there were no solutions that were proffered. At that particular rally, first of all, there was a very strong call to the President of the Republic to obey the rule of law by following the court orders, which is something that is a serious concern, especially to those people who hold democratic ideals. Number two, there was a breakdown of the figures and numbers in terms of the revenue of this country and where it is being applied. And there was a proposal of where even money can be gotten to pay teachers at this particular point in time, because there was a very strong call and it is an alternative, it is an advice to the central government or the people in power that, look, here is where we are spending a lot of our money. We are wasting money on projects that are not sustainable. There's a lot of wastage in government. There is a lot of corruption in government. If we were able to stem A, B, C, D, do this and this, move this money from here to here, we'd be able to get ourselves out of this quagmire that we find ourselves. Now, those are solutions that were proffered at Uhuru Park. Right. Unfortunately, my brother only wants to look at...
So some take issue, Edwin, with how these alternatives are given, saying that the opposition is using mere rhetoric at public rallies, whipping up emotion, and that alternative could have been presented in a different light, because unfortunately, the message and the impact and the image that many are left with is politicians in school uniform, sucking lollipops, and then there's obviously the big one of that M-Pesa pay bill number.
Well, here's what you need to understand, that politics sometimes is a little bit dramatic. It is accompanied by drama because these are political players. But the truth of the matter is that there were very tangible solutions that were proffered at that particular, rally. And I really don't understand why people criticize the M-Pesa pay bill number, because if you understand why that pay bill number was proposed in the first place, because it was clearly understood that the government's plan was to starve these teachers into submission. Now, if somebody knows, everyone knows that the only way the teachers were going to get what was given to them by the courts was to sustain the strike. And we have somebody who has come up with a very diabolic scheme to starve you into submission so that you go back to school, so that you forfeit what is rightfully yours. How do you sustain a strike, Yvonne? We are saying that a proposal was given that Kenyans can put together whatever it is that they have. Many of us who call ourselves the middle class, even by the 15th of a month, we don't have any money. If our salaries delay by 2 weeks, it is a riot in this city. So that if somebody were to give you 5,000 shillings alone, not your full salary, just 5,000 shillings to get you to the paycheck, people appreciate this, and it was such a noble gesture, and I don't understand why somebody would look at it as an unsustainable solution. Nobody was going to raise 117 billion shillings through the system, but can we raise something that can even if we were just to give every single primary school teacher 2,000 shillings a month, it is going to make a difference in their lives.
I'm interested in hearing what they're planning to do with that money now that the teachers are back to school and paid.
Edwin?
Well, the plan with the money has been articulated by the leaders of the opposition. We were told that the money would be presented to KNUT, the unions that and KUPPET, and maybe they would be using that money to pay their lawyers or whatever it is that
Yeah, but you see, Edwin, what comes out of that is that there was no clear strategy on one, how to use the funds, two, who would administer the funds, and even if it was 2,000 shillings, like you say, per month, we have an average of 288,000 teachers in the country. Was CORD optimistic that they were going to raise this money to give? Was a figure arrived at that we will give every teacher 2,000 shillings?
Let me tell you this.
Had you anticipated the fact that perhaps the strike could have gone on longer than 5 weeks,
let me tell you
2,
this.
3, 4 months?
Let me tell you this. As I have written in my opinion article, I said this was about sustaining prisoners of war. Even under the Geneva Conventions, when you take somebody prisoner, you have a responsibility to give them bread and water. You don't starve them to death. Now, this is not the first effort that Kenyans are putting together to support their own. We had Kenyans for Kenyans after Westgate. We had a very serious drive for that young man called Jadudi who had a problem with his head. We do not limit the magnanimity of the people of Kenya. If we did not have the bad press that was directed at that particular initiative, we probably would have raised the 117 billion shillings. Because if you ask every Kenyan everywhere you go, they tell you they stand with the teachers. Unfortunately, there are people who want to stand with the teachers, and they believe that once they've shot a tweet or two or liked a post by the NAT DSG, that they have done everything that is required to be done. And there are people who think there is something more that we can do, even if it's 1,000 shillings we can give and support the teachers.
One of the things that the media has completely refused to interrogate is the fact that this is the second M-Pesa bill number that CORD has launched. Sometime early this year, they launched a number 673673, which was Orange Relief something. Nobody has ever told us what they did with that money, how much they raised, where they took the money, and so it's quite suspicious. Now, a couple of months later, they have another number which is only one number different. Again, so as of that day, we were told they'd raised 200,000 shillings. As of that day, I would love to see that check being given to NAT. And then, but it also comes back to for us to ask ourselves: is that how they would solve a problem if they were in government?
Well, if they were in government, they said it very clearly. They would take money from NYS, they would stop corruption and pay teachers. It wouldn't be an M-Pesa thing because you have the instruments of power that particular moment.
And now...
And what I would have loved to see, Yvonne, the same scrutiny that was directed at this number, how I wish we were directing the scrutiny that we directed at the CORD pay bill number to the other things that we are looking at, for instance, the scandal in NYS. No. Instead, if you look at the reaction to the scandal in NYS, for instance, people were rushing to defend the cabinet secretary even before the facts came out. The same scrutiny that people are directing at...
Edwin, sounds like you're making a case for two wrongs.
No, I'm not making a case for two wrongs. I'm saying it is okay for the public to raise the questions of accountability and transparency as far as
But you can see where that would come out in terms of if you're not accountable with that
Nobody has made that allegation.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Nobody has made the allegation that the opposition has not been transparent.
But people are raising questions about how the fund will be administered and whether it will be given to the teachers, because first it was to sustain them and then it changed that it was going to pay their legal fees.
Yes.
And the question begs, was any consultation done with the teachers before launching this pay bill number to ask them how best can we assist you in this matter at the moment?
Well,
was there consultation with the teachers?
You see, if you have an appreciation that the only way the teachers were going to get their dues is if they sustain the strike, the only question to you becomes, how do you sustain the strike? And I would like to hear from other Kenyans what they think would have been done to be able to sustain the teachers through the period within which they needed to sustain themselves.
Let's ask Ngunjiri.
What else were the teachers supposed to
I
do?
think
The government was not going to pay them. We
I
Kenyans
think-
decided to help them. What is
see,
wrong with that?
I don't understand why this how Sifuna talks about we Kenyans decided to help them as if the teachers are not Kenyans. Remember, this Kenyans are actually part and parcel of our community. And what was happening, the entire teachers' strike has affected a lot of people: teachers, parents, children, government as well. Things are basically stalled to a halt on as far as the education sector is concerned. For you to tell me that the way to solve that problem is to sustain the strike by giving teachers money so that they can stay out of work, rather than to had I been the one advising
Yeah, what would you have
what I'd
done?
have told them to do, first and foremost, I'd have asked them. I'd have in that platform, I would have created a timetable of how I was going to walk into one, Ministry of Education, walk into two, TSC, how I was going to seek a meeting with the president, how I was going to seek a meeting with NAT, how I was going to put all of them together in one room and make them agree. You see, now, whether or not that happens, because this is politics that CORD is playing with this issue. But it was important for them to come up with actually practical, sustainable ways. Raila can walk, the CORD principals can actually walk into Kaimenyi's office. I doubt very much you'd refuse to see them.
To be fair, though, the opposition has asked for national dialogue in this
So
country.
many
But you
times I
see-
was going
and-
to say
and-
that.
You see,
and
I
the
was
the
saying
problem
government
is,
has
and
not-
again,
First time.
they takes me back to how to how the opposition is failing us. Remember, any opposition is supposed to do three things. One, speak for the voiceless.
Yeah.
Two, constructively criticize the government. Three, offer an alternative to the government. Now, when you talk about the fact that they talked about national dialogue early last year, the reason they were looking for national dialogue was because they needed to come back into political relevance. They had
There's
been
no
out of
proof.
political
You have
relevance.
no
No,
proof
no, no,
for
no, no.
that.
They had been out of political relevance. They had actually disappeared for close to 9 months since the elections.
But Ngunjiri, you are talking about their intentions.
Sure.
Yes.
As if you know that for a
Because
fact.
we are political. We are
He does
political
not.
observers.
He does
You
not.
can
In
tell.
fact-
Raila had been away for
How
3
can you
months.
tell?
Think about this. Raila had been away for 3 months.
Uh-huh.
When he comes back, the first thing he says that we need national dialogue. And the point that strikes you is, are you telling me that for the 3 months you're away, it took you being out of the country to notice that this country needed
No.
national dialogue?
You see, you have to put everything in context.
And then when he
this
then
is where we go
remember
wrong as a
he
country.
held a rally.
Okay,
Let me
let's-
finish.
okay.
Let me finish.
All right,
He
let's
came
have a
in to town. He gave an ultimatum for national dialogue. The ultimatum reached on Sabasaba. Then rather than now move, it became a referendum call.
That is not
Okoa
the true
Kenya.
chronology.
That's how
of
Okoa
events.
Kenya
okay,
came
let's hear Edwin's
That's not the
version
true
of this.
chronology of
Yeah.
events. Yvonne, if you recall correctly, after the leader of opposition came back from the 3-month sabbatical that he had taken in the US, he came back to a country that was crying out for leadership, because at that particular point there were so many things that were going wrong. For instance, if you remember correctly, that period, the hashtag of Baba while you are away was not created by Raila Odinga. It was created by Kenyans on social media saying there have been so many problems and we are looking to you to provide leadership. And I remember very correctly that after the Uhuru Park rally, where he sent out a call to his brother, the president, to have a sit down and discuss the issues that are affecting the country. The very next day, I think it was Jamhuri Day, there was a public event at Nyayo Stadium.
Yeah.
And the president actually said this is what he's been waiting for. He wants to be able to get that opportunity to sit down with other leaders and to discuss the issues and see what solutions can be found. You see, there is nothing wrong with you sitting together and discussing the issues that are affecting the country. The sense that we as a countrymen got at that particular point is that the Jubilee leadership was treating the counterparts on the opposition as if they were lepers. Like, if they were
Okay.
to sit together, somehow they would get them to
All right.
catch something
Okay.
or do something that they didn't want to
I'd
do.
like us to move forward a little bit away from the issue of what happened during the
Yes.
Sabasaba rallies
Yes.
and just talk about whether we've been able to adapt to the new system, which is that some of the issues that are deemed to be national issues, perhaps there's bigger issues for the common man, and which is where we have devolution and the counties and that sort of thing. And some say, well, you know what? How has CORD shown leadership in the 24 counties in which they have leadership, and sometimes harping on these big national issues,
Yes.
which are still important,
Yes.
but then just remembering that if you are able to show guidance in the 24 counties in which CORD, has leadership, then you can then say, look, we've done this in these 24 counties, and then you can then extrapolate that to the national level.
Well, the counties, the challenges that the counties are facing have been universally known. If you are to be fair, that all the 47 counties have had challenges with regards to issues of management and financial probity. It is something that has happened throughout the counties, from central to coast to. But there are so many things that have been achieved through the devolution. There are places in northeastern Kenya that are seeing tarmac for the first time. We have expanded bursaries in some of these places, and we have seen development that had not been seen in many years. So the challenges
But
are
we've
there.
also seen some big issues.
What I wanted you to understand is that I do not believe that we have completely adapted to the system that we have. For instance, we started by laying the basis that the institutions that have been created, for instance, to check the executive, like the National Assembly, has been a big letdown, because you are not supposed to know, for instance, how a member of parliament is going to vote on a particular motion before they even see the motion.
Yeah.
So that we are in a country whereby if a motion is proposed by a certain person or is going to affect a certain person, everybody takes their side, even before they read the motion.
Right.
If I give you the example of the impeachment motion, for instance,
Yeah.
they have not even seen it. But we are not supposed to know how these people are going to vote before the motion is even presented to them.
Ngunjiri, the impeachment motion will now be turned into a confidence motion, says Aden Duale.
Yes, and I think again, opposition was being a bit ambitious on that. But I would like to highlight a point that Sifuna seems to have glossed over on the issue of the counties, because it shows the level of hypocrisy that we are seeing from opposition. One of the biggest problems that this country is fighting with is the issue of corruption. And we've had reports coming up that are actually mentioning corruption happening in counties that are run by CORD governors. While at the same time, while they were insisting that people in the national government needed to resign or to step aside from office or whatever it is that's supposed to happen, we had them at the same time defending their governors and saying that no, they need to stay in office until due diligence and due process is followed. So, and that's what takes away from the messaging, so that you're selling an idea that only applies to the other side. And I, to be honest, that has happened on both sides. A lot of the times we've had situations where an idea is sold, but it seems to be only applicable to the other side. But this is the problem we're having. And when Sifuna argues that, for example, on the issue of the impeachment, you don't expect to know which side somebody is going to vote, let's also remember that we have parties that exist, and the party, we have a party that has formed the government, or a coalition that has formed the government, and they want to impeach the head of that party and get him out of running the government. Of course, you're going to expect that the people who are on that side are going to say they will not support that impeachment.
Okay, let's talk about opposition that's coming from different quarters as well. Forget what's happening with CORD and the criticism that comes from there.
Yeah.
But Ngunjiri, there's also some loud noise coming from within the Jubilee coalition
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
Some members of URP not happy. Alfred Keter talking about the motion to impeach Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru. We've also had some very stiff opposition from governors, the two chairs of governor, former chair Isaac Ruto and now Peter Munya.
Yes.
So what would you say about that also, and that there seems to be stifling of dissenting voices even within Jubilee?
Actually, there's no stifling of dissenting voices, because you get to see the point where Keter is actually going to take his motion to Parliament. He's going to get defeated in Parliament. He's not going to be stopped from taking the
But he's
bill.
going to get defeated.
You see, so you also
can
have a
already
situation. I can already see that. I can already see that. And
Yeah.
so what we actually seen
Yeah.
is a situation where even within the Jubilee coalition, you actually have and this is very good for democracy. You actually have ideas competing.
Yes, but
remember
when you
one of the
think
things
about
that we
it, Ngunjiri,
forget. Yes.
Ngunjiri, even when there was, this whole idea of a referendum, and
Yes.
Isaac Ruto brought it up and then
Yes.
accused of siding and working
With
with
the
CORD,
opposition.
Yes.
even though we're not sure yet, and we cannot say here for a fact where that, if any, discussions have happened between the two. But he was accused of, working with CORD on that matter, even though their referendum, well, they
'Cause
had some meeting
you see, the
points.
expectation-
But you understand where this is coming
Yes,
from.
and the expectation is, if you're a member of this particular coalition,
Yeah.
and you have an issue that you want to challenge the leadership of that coalition, you actually don't need to go into the press or call a public rally to
Bunjiri, you
deal
have
with
done
it.
that before.
Yes, but what I'm
In the
saying
parties
is,
that you were in.
no, I'm saying that this is where we are coming from. So you're going to have people who are going to wake up and say what you're doing is actually fighting the party. But remember, I want to use a very interesting
Bunjiri,
example.
you have fought
Let
the
me use an
party
example.
before, haven't you, though?
Yes. Let me
Yes.
use a good example, but I wasn't elected. Let me use a good
doesn't
example.
matter,
No,
does
let
it?
me use a good example.
Uh-huh.
When people got killed in Mandera,
Yeah.
people from Nyeri, you had a very interesting fight going on between the member of parliament from Kieni and the member of parliament and the member of parliament, the majority leader who is a member of parliament from Northeastern. And this is a fight that actually happened within the Jubilee coalition. Why? Because they were fighting over issues. Now, my problem, and this is the problem, this is a solution I'd wish to see from opposition, is where you're actually raising issues that people can take positions on. When you say you're going to impeach the president because of insecurity, because of corruption, these are issues that have already been articulated and put on the table by everybody, including
See,
Obama. Let me finish.
It is clear
Edwin,
Ngunjiri also
let me finish.
has not even seen
He's-
that. He has not seen
I
this
haven't
motion.
seen, but I have
He's
had.
speculating.
I saw a press conference.
Uh-huh.
A press conference where SLE developed the four arguments that they want to use
Right.
to impeach the president. And you're sitting there and thinking, come on, guys. You guys are just you're just playing politics with this thing.
You see,
Because
Yvonne,
impeaching the president is actually a massive issue. It's not
It
something
is.
you wake up in the
It is
morning
indeed.
and decide you're going to do so that you can be relevant politically.
No.
It's not.
Now that is what is called political rhetoric.
Uh-huh.
The truth of the matter is this. Impeachment is a mechanism that has been put in place to ensure that the legislature can check the executive.
Yeah.
That we can hold the president's fidelity to the law and the constitution that he sought to uphold. The debate that I would like to have is not whether this motion is dead on arrival or not, because so and so doesn't have a number, so and so doesn't have a numbers,
Yeah.
but are there grounds? Are there grounds? Because the Constitution has provided 3 clear grounds on which you can move such a motion. So if the Constitution has provided, for instance, we can move a motion to impeach the president on the basis that he has, breached a specific clause of the Constitution or provision of the Constitution. Is there an instance in the recent past where the president has breached a clear provision of the Constitution? That is a debate we would like to
But
have.
Ngunjiri, why not wait for it to hit the floor of the House and then look at the motion in its totality and say, okay,
Precisely.
yes, it will not
Whether
see
there
the
are
light
grounds
of
or
day,
not.
or it will?
Because they actually held a press conference and explained to us what they were doing.
But that's
you
not
see,
motions
what they
that are brought to the
no,
floor of the
no.
House. There's no motion that is
you
brought
see,
at a press conference,
but you
Ngunjiri.
see,
That is
they
why you have
held a
members of
press
parliament.
conference. They held a press conference,
Okay.
saying, announced they were going to impeach the president, and explained why. Now, if they actually intended to do this without politics or without playing politics with it, they
How
would have
would they
taken
have
the
done it?
bill
Yeah.
to Parliament.
Where
We'd
there are
be
no
discussing
cameras.
it. We'd be
Where
where there are no cameras.
in
Then
Parliament.
we see. Okay, so you see,
There are
he
cameras.
actually
There are
admits.
cameras in
You
You see,
Parliament, though.
he
There are
admits.
cameras in
He
Parliament.
admits that you see, Edwin. The point I'm trying to make is this: you did not have to call a press conference to announce you're doing an impeachment. You could actually have taken
So,
it to
okay.
Parliament as a bill for it to be debated there. But you see, they first articulated the bill publicly on a media platform,
You need to put
including
everything
why,
in context.
Okay.
including why they want
All
to
right,
impeach
but
it.
the essence
So of course we needed to. People
okay.
are going to challenge it after that.
All right, I want us to wind up our discussion
Yes.
now. And I'll start with you, because I'll leave the person who doesn't
to defend.
speak for
Has
CORD
to defend.
in the official sense of the word. But Ngunjiri, if this were you today, in the opposition, what are some of those key things that you would do? Say with the teachers' crisis, and try and sort of remove any other lenses that you might have on. What would you do in terms of providing that sort of alternative voice and alternative solutions? What do you think would be the benchmarks for success? Very quickly.
First and foremost, I would completely turn around the leadership of the opposition as we have it today. I think the current leadership is not able to engage with the issues as we have. For example, Ababu came with a very interesting proposal that on what he thought, and he's the Secretary General of this party, of the opposition, of ODM, which is a large portion of the opposition, of what he thinks needs to happen, and he took it to Parliament. Interestingly, when the rally was being held about the teachers' strike, nobody mentioned that bill. Nobody talked about the bill that the Secretary General of their party had actually taken to Parliament. So what I would do,
Yeah.
for example, is work. There's a young generation of leaders who are actually willing to do stuff like that. Bandi has also come up with a very interesting bill on what he thinks, where he thinks money can be gotten for to pay teachers. Step in the right direction. What the opposition needs at this moment in time is actually a complete overhaul of its leadership. They're still stuck on playing politics with national issues. without solutions. I would go with, for example, I would look at Ababu's proposal very, very critically. Of course, 50% is politics to some extent, but there's a possibility of creating a process where you can actually reduce the amount of money that is paid to the
So you think
leadership.
his motion is something that
The idea.
the idea of
The
it.
idea.
Yet
The
even
amount
the
he's come up
speaker-
with.
Yet even the speaker himself pouring cold water on it before it
Before
hits
it
the
even
floor of
hits-
the
Yes,
House.
yes.
And some say that is already taking sides and that is partisan.
But you see, remember our political system is like the American political system, where people have failed to understand that the speaker actually represents a particular position of the party. Where if you look at how American Senate
Is
has
that so?
operated, the speaker of the House, his work is to push and to ensure that the government processes are implemented. Because remember, he was elected.
That's why you have a leader of majority.
He was
I thought
elected.
that's the work of
That's-
Aden
that's
Duale,
why
the
you
leader
have-
of
they
majority.
competed.
They competed. This is not the Marende time.
fine.
This is not the Marende time.
Even
Muturi
Marende
was elected.
Marende
So was Marende.
But
elected.
the constitution was
Kapar.
different.
Aye,
Okay,
come
all right.
on.
Let's leave it at
Please.
that. Please wind up. I'm told we're out of time. Edwin,
What
your
would-
conclusion.
He has run out of
Tell
ideas.
us. Yeah, because now you see he's muddied the waters a little bit. But yes, I mean, just what you think going forward and the defense, because even when you take a look at the feedback,
Yes.
there's not quite some positive feedback about the role of the opposition.
Well, that
Why
is
is that?
that is because
Because those are the people you should be speaking
that's what
to.
I'm telling you. That is
Yeah.
because people do not understand that we are in a changed political environment and we are operating under a totally different system. Actually, if you were to do an honest audit, there have been dozens of solutions that have been provided. Last time we were here, we were asked how many bills, for instance, we've brought before the House, and a comparison was made with the bills that Duale has moved. People forget that the bills that Duale moves are constitutional bills that are already provided for under the Constitution, and the bulk of them are not any original ideas that he has or that Jubilee have. There have been over 10 bills between 2014 to 2015, from Millie Odhiambo's bill on in vitro fertilization, the climate change bill. There's another one for the National AIDS Control Authority, which is also court-sponsored. There is one for diabetes control. So that this image that the opposition is doing nothing really is something that is a little bit misplaced. And even in terms of alternative ideas, at every turn when this country has faced a challenge, alternative ideas have been presented, but the problem is that we are in such a polarized environment, so that even if your idea is good, just by the fact that you are
originator.
the originator is from the opposition, it is highly unlikely that it is going to be taken up and implemented.
Okay.
At the end of the day, by the way,
Yeah.
every person in this country wants the president to succeed. He succeeds, we all succeed as a country, but
right.
we're not going to beat him because he has failed. We will beat him because we'll have better ideas for greater success for the country.
All right, okay. We'll see
It's a
what
good way
happens
for him to finish.
in
I hope
27.
God was listening to him finishing up.
All right, Ngunjiri Wambugu, thank you very much. And Edwin Sifuna on Checkpoint. I'm seeing a lot of your messages coming in, but let's have John Alanamu summarize our discussion. What's the point tonight, John?
All right, what's the point this evening? Very, very interesting discussion. I think I'll lead off from where Edwin Sifuna left off by asking the first question from our first point. Has the opposition adapted to a new constitutional dispensation? It may have, but perhaps the reason why things aren't being noticed is because the country is polarized. Even though critics of the opposition would say that they haven't. The alternatives that they're offering are either old hat or are packaged in a certain way that they just don't sell themselves. And that was the second point. What are the alternatives that the opposition has been offering? The opposition has been offering alternatives in truth. Like right at the end of the rally that they held with respect to the teacher strike, there was a raft of solutions that they offered with respect to what was happening then. But what was the packaging of that? What do Kenyans remember about that rally? Do they remember Raila's speech right at the end? Or do they remember Johnston Muthama's sentiments? about the politics that was going on. That is something that people ought to consider about the opposition. Are they packaging their messages in such a way that they will make sense and be heard and taken up not just by the government but by the people who matter, who happen to be voters as well? Do they get the voters on their sides with how they package their information? And remember, the basis of any alternative that an opposition will offer starts even prior to the election in their manifestos. Are they being true to their manifestos in the alternatives that they offer? Is there a philosophy? Is there an ideology that they pursue every time they offer an alternative? Finally, and this is a controversial one, how do you separate the luminaries of the opposition from their past roles in government? When the opposition was on about the teacher strike, people were very quick to point out Kalonzo Musyoka's past sentiments on teacher strikes in the past. They were quick to point out in other respects with other issues, Raila Odinga's role as the former Prime Minister. How have they been able to separate themselves from those past roles by offering solutions that actually allow them to be seen as an opposition that stands up to the challenge that is being offered by the Jubilee government? One more test that perhaps they should be thinking about is whether they are letting new, younger, bolder leaders and perhaps with new ideas come through the ranks of the opposition to become part of that government in waiting. And that this evening is a point.